Well, hello everybody. My name's Carol Costley and I'm a Professor of Work and Learning at Middlesex University. And I'm here today as I have great pleasure in welcoming Davide Nicolini, who's a Professor of Organisational Studies at the Warwick University's Business School in the UK. So I'm going to give a brief introduction and then I'm going to ask Davide some questions. So Davide co-directs the IKON Research Centre and coordinates the Practice, Process and Institution Research Programme. In the past, he's held positions and visiting appointments at the University of Oslo, the Tavistock Institute in London, ESAD in Barcelona, Universities Trento and Bergamo in Italy. His current research focuses on the development of the practice-based approach and its application to phenomena such as expertise, management knowing and attention, collaboration, safety and technological innovation in organisations. He's also interested in the refinement and promotion of processual, relational and materialist research methods. He has used these approaches to study healthcare organisations, managerial work, construction sites, factories, public organisations, cybersecurity and pharmacies and scientific labs. So very much welcome to you, Davide, and I'm going to start my questions with this one. Do you think it is reasonable to argue that much that can be found in practice theory is relevant to apply and consider within our new set of changing circumstances and practices?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. And I noticed that you struggled to do the process practice words, so
I did.
It's very interesting. So let me try to answer the question. So I would answer that not everything that is done under the umbrella of practice theory is as useful to practitioner as I think the very kind person who sent these questions to us implies. Let me put it this way. Practice theory has two wrong ways to go and one ways which I think may be profitable and advantageous for helping practitioners and also for connecting practitioners and academics. So the one way in which practice theory can go wrong is giving the idea that everything is practice and theory has no role in human activity and in the refinement of human activity. Now, of course, we'll say one word about what theory means in this context, but the idea that theory doesn't matter is very, very dangerous, especially in modern times. So that's the wrong way of going for practice theory. There's another wrong way of going for practice theory, which is something that, of course, some of my colleagues tend to do, which is think that practice theory is just the theory of practice, so just another game for academics to play. You know, sort of like a new object for the old type of theorizations with long words, which I used, and you rightly have troubles sometimes articulating. I think some of my colleagues, I call them philosophy envy. Some of my colleagues enjoy this, which is fair enough, because in playfully handling new categories, usually you invent something, there's an innovation, okay? But when the game becomes an end in itself, we're just going back and practice just becomes another topics of discussion. So not everything that can be found in modern practice theory is useful. And this, I'm really just reiterating things that Pierre Bourdieu said many years ago, okay? That the practice of academics and the practice of practitioner don't align all the time. So, and just to make it a long story short, and I'm sure in the future we'll have time to develop this, I think that there is a way for practice theory to contribute. And this is based on two elements. First is by challenging the traditional view of theory as something which is detached, which something is abstract, something that So requires rethinking what theory is, taking it down from the clouds, making theory something much more approachable, much more simple. And second, it's developing new forms of discursivity, new concept, new way of talking, new way of seeing that allows us to engage the world differently. And the two are related. So, okay, so taking theory is much less a formalized view and much less abstract constructions of concept, and more as a way of talking, tools for thinking, tools for talking, tools for seeing that allows us to engage the world in a different ways. Remember, anytime we engage in the world from the practice theory perspective, we need to have an intelligibility of something. We need to understand, we have to have a concept of what we are seeing before we see. This is something that we've heard repeated from post-positivist philosophy for the last 40, 50 years. Seeing is not neutral. So new discursivity, new concept are what theory must look like if it has to become useful, because at that point, not only the academics, but also the practitioner can see different things, and that's what the difference happening in the world.
Could I ask you then, that sounds very apposite to people, for example, doing professional doctorates or practice-based PhDs where they are practitioners and already aware of the context. If you're saying that we have to have, you know, an idea about it before we can wade in with theorizing it, if that's what you're saying, is it?
Yes. What I'm trying to say is that the practice-based doctorates are should still aim at developing new ways of seeing, new concepts. Okay, but this concept may look differently, if we want more modest, than the theories that we expect to see in contemporary academic journals. Has to be categories that resonate with the work of other practitioners. This is, by the way, one of the things why practice, I think, is so successful, because if you go to a practitioner, if he says, I need to change your practice, or we need to analyze your practice, this resonates with the things they have to do with every day. People understand when you talk about practices. If you're talking about other concepts like, you know, discourses or all this more conceptual stuff, which is very useful, but they struggle. Okay. So doctoral people still have to develop something which is akin to, but not exactly similar to, the middle level theories. So conceptual tools, forms of discursivity, words, connections. This can be also a quantitative relationship, but that allows them to see real problem from the different angles. So there's always an element of abstractions, an element of, so it's not just finding a new solution for an existing problem, but a new ways of framing the solution. This requires usually new conceptual things, some form of innovations. That's what I'm thinking. It's where the sweet spot happened. Okay, so sending PhD people to say, I just solved one problem, and therefore I have a doctorate because I'm doctorate in solving problem. That's not what a professional doctor should be about. But neither pushing toward doing sort of like mimicking the traditional academic large constructions, if that makes sense.
I think it does make sense. And I think there is some critique about professional doctorates in particular, that theory is not drawn upon enough. Sure, people have developed some really fine methodological approaches for their research, but not drawn on theory enough. So what advice would you give to someone undertaking, you know, a doctorate where they are a practitioner in the area in which they're researching, in terms of drawing upon theory?
I hesitate because although I have supervised and I've helped a practitioner, I don't say supervise because mature practitioners supervise themselves. You can just facilitate them. I think the best things I can say is that help people to stay in between, staying on track is between, and see help them to have these conversations, put in conversations some of the existing categories, the problem they're facing, and see how the existing categories can be translated in order to become resources for solving the problems. Okay, and then how the problem that they solve can be used in order to modify, enrich the categories that they use. But it's at the level of construct, you know, at the level of way of talking about things rather than great, large constructions that I see as I said, the sweet spot happening. So it's smaller conversations. It's an invitation to a more modest type of theorizing, more localized, and not less important. And as I said, this is what the modern contemporary practice theories also suggests that we should do. So if you want, one of the ways to describe my view of practice theories is that we should be we should remember Lyotard's idea that, you know, we should abandon the ambitions to construct, just to focus on grand discourses, these grand constructions, this theory of everything. Okay, they are so remoted from the day-to-day that they are unusable.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'd love to carry on with that, but better ask the next question, which is, of the myriad of things that could be done, what one change do you think would most help doctoral outcomes to be more practical?
So, first of all, I want to say that I think this question is a little bit too big. So it takes doctoral sort of, you know, to practical doctoral to be one single animal covering the whole thing. So it's very difficult to give these responses. And I think I just said it, you know, this sweeping statement. So will have to be some distinctions and going in different disciplines and different domains and see how can we respond to this. So I will respond from the perspective where I am. I work in the business school. So I have to say that in many ways, my worry lately is that actually a PhD in business school, but I suppose it happens also in other environments, is the risk that we are too practical in the bad sense. Okay, so basically the pressure to publish in many academic domains has become that we are training students how to become writer of articles rather to be intellectual that will develop the great ideas then others will use to move practice forward in 2 generations, okay? Because it takes 2 generations for a big idea then to be translated into construct that people use, as we mentioned before. So in many ways, I want to be paradoxical. I said that my worry about traditional PhDs is that traditional PhD are becoming less intellectual than they should be. Okay, so you also have the answer in order for doctoral programs, and I think in this case we're talking about general doctoral programs, not Doctor of Professional Studies. Is that I think we'll have very quickly to unlink the idea that the only way or the main way to judge productivity of academics is in terms of publications. I think this is becoming really, so the box that academics have to tick is ruling the game rather than vice versa. So we have to unplug this spiral of the fact that in academia today, the more abstract, the more intellectual in the 1800s sort of century understanding of the meaning you are, the more you're valued, and that the more closer you go to real problems, the less you're valued. And the ranking of the journals and careers are made based on this type of hierarchy. If you don't affect this, anything else will never move, for the simple reasons that individuals faced with the fact that should I do the right thing or should I do the things that will feed my family are in front of a decision that they should not have to make, because in too many times people take the affectively, emotionally right decision that my family counts more, so I make a compromise. So
it's quite a controversial point that you've hit there, especially regarding publishing, because we're talking about all doctorates really, and some PhDs have a more practice base. A PhD in arts, for example, often does, and some professional doctorates may be more theoretically based, but notwithstanding any of that, that there seems to be a focus upon publishing in academic journals. So are you saying that we shouldn't make people have to do that if really they're not going to become academics working in a university, that they're going to put their doctoral, their doctorateness to use in a different forum? In which case, are we not making a two-tier system?
Well, so the two-tier system is an effect of this hierarchy of value that we have in place. And make no mistakes, this hierarchy of values is kept in place by very material interests, because certain universities have the upper hand, the northern part of the world have upper hand. So this particular view of academia and this particular view of the hierarchy of knowledge, what counts of a hierarchy of value, is not just theoretical, it's very material, very practical. It has very real consequences in the world, okay? So there's a lot of people that have interest in keeping this game going. What I'm trying to say is that your distinction between first class and second class assume that the first class is the people who do things which are theoretical, as I said before, which are abstract, which are required, and that the rest is second hand. And I want to be even more potentially contentious. So, okay, so on the one hand, I'm saying that I've seen, from my perspective, I've seen after our community has been affected by this virus, that only publications in top journals count, and the top journals are as far removed as possible from practice. I've seen these things infecting all sort of other departments. I work in the social sciences. I've seen the other social sciences being infected by the same virus. So contrary to all the statement in principle, in modern academia, very often people are evaluated on terms of publications. And these infections, eventually sort of affects through, for example, expectations of the supervisors. Okay, so they spread also everywhere, so that this has become silently or explicitly a pervasive expectations. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm talking about here a very ramified issue. Okay, but you asked me one thing that I will do. This is where I will start to break the point, to break the cycle. I said contentious. I was wondering, and if continuing to call, as we do, for example, and sometimes call it sort of like professional doctorates, is wise. I mean, I know that you have in your institutions, you don't use the PhD in practice. You use a different words. As long as we will have real PhD, a PhD of practice, we actually, as long as the doctoral studies who are focused on something else, which is not development or pure theory of academia, has always defined relations to the altar, to the different things, which is the PhD. You're always going to have a hierarchy.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier about the North and different countries, the Anglophone world that has done that, and that other countries are looking more at PhDs which are more practice-based. That's the way. I just read a few up-and-coming papers, quite interesting about the way they've done that. But in one sense, well, I don't know. It's another way of doing it, and I think that would be an interesting thing to look at in the future.
What I'm suggesting is that let's not kid ourselves on the power of words. It continues to call them professional or practice-based PhDs, doing them a disservice, because we still call them PhD, and there's going to be someone And I have some interesting example of examiners who,
Yes.
when they hear that this is a PhD, they hear PhD, but they don't hear practice, and they use the same type of expectations. So the game here is not that of rebalancing the hierarchy of rebalance. Is that a change in the game? That's the idea. So that's what I said before. Sorry if I took it from a very abstract angle. The idea, the idea is to change what counts as theory and what counts as valuable theory, rather than trying to subvert the order and put the abstract subservient to the practicals, because it ain't gonna happen. Because as I said, I don't think that the North American universities and the North and people like me will give up the power so easily and say, yeah, it's fine. So the kick us no, put in the second order, cut our salaries. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the big university in the North will accept that other universities who do things differently can take their place. So that is, that's the ramification I'm talking about, material ramifications. That's what I said, is a provocation. Is them calling PhD just making a comparison that shouldn't be there? But of course, the word itself doesn't matter. It's what the word generates.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for that response. I think we've got time for one more question. Is there an effective means by which practitioners can develop theory from their practices, especially considering there is now so much practitioner-led research? We kind of touched on this. Did you have anything more to say?
Well, I have to say I am a little bit of old school. I think the two main ways in which practitioner can develop theory in the forms that we said is through two relatively simple to say and so very difficult to do things. One is reflection. Okay, so as I said, I'm old school. I've been writing about this for 30 years. Reflection, not as introspection, but reflection as conversations, as social activity, as a critical reflection when you actually take the category, the words that we use as we're doing right now, and you start to see what the words do, who use them, okay, sort of in which practice are these words and the categories entangled, and what are the effects that they produce. We're just discussing an example, so what it does a certain concept of theory with a big T produces in the world in terms of distributing access to resources, in terms of distributing people, putting people in places. Okay, so critical reflection means looking at this and learning. And the second thing is, I said, so that's for practitioners to do in their own place, see how the category that we use. And the second thing is, once you've done that, is that to generate new concept, new forms of discursivity. The word of discursivity was introduced by Foucault, who picked it up even from before him. We don't need to go into these long words, but it was basically the idea that words sometimes and discourse make us see things differently. Okay, they open a space. It's like light, where things manifest themselves in different ways, which is also the things that makes doing research so exhilarating and fulfilling, that it's an actual creations, and it can be very small, okay, and the creations in the intellectual space may have some consequences, okay. So instead of calling something female or sex, you call it gender, and a whole world moves just before inventing new categories. You don't need to have these big categories. Maybe much smaller, maybe see the problem from different angles. So reflections and creating a new discursivity or new conceptual apparatus or new views of particular issues that allows people to get to the world from a different angle and makes you see all possible ramifications. As I said, maybe old style, but this is as far as I got at the moment.
Well, I think that's really enlightening, and I think that our viewers and listeners will really appreciate that. So I'd really like to thank you, Davide, for the interview. Thank you for warning us against the other dangerous virus that's around for us practitioners and academics.
And thank you very much for inviting me, Carol. As I said, some of the issues that I was tackling are quite a little bit complex, and So I know that we have in the future an opportunity to meet again in our conference, and I promise that I will take a little bit more time to explain more detailed by view on how at the core of this is rethinking what theory is, not in order to make theory, as I said, not dispose of theory, or not so much as making practice, just theorizing practice, but sort of like pushing the idea of what type of theory may be useful for practitioners. So
thank you. We really look forward to that. I think that will be most helpful for all of us, and we'll brace ourselves for that discussion.
Thank you.